So this is a really good question, and it's something that my students also find confusing. I teach English as a second language, and knowing when to use G, J, G, J, it can be really difficult. So I do have a spelling pattern for this. I say pattern rather than rule because there are lots of exceptions, as with all languages and grammar. But there is a general pattern that you can follow which will help you with knowing when to use G and when to use J. But I'm going to split this video into two parts. First, we'll look at reading and pronunciation, and then I'll explain a bit about writing and spelling. So let's concentrate just on the letter G, okay? When you're reading, the letter G can be pronounced in two different ways. It can be pronounced as a hard G, G sound, like in the word game, or we can pronounce it as a soft J sound, a bit like a J, J, like in the word giraffe. So how do we know when we're reading how to pronounce this G? So it's a very easy rule. You need to look at the letter next to the G. So if your G is followed by E, I, or Y, then we'll pronounce it as a soft J sound, like in the words giraffe, general, and gym. So if your G is followed by any other letter that's not E, I, or Y, then we'll pronounce it with the hard G sound, like game, or guitar, or garden. Okay. As I said earlier, this is a pattern rather than a rule because there are exceptions to this rule. So for example, the word get or girl, even though they're followed with an E or an I, we use the hard G, G. And that's because these words come from Old English or Germanic languages, so they keep the hard G sound. The J sound with E, I, or Y tend to be used for words that come from French or Latin or the Romance languages. So there are some exceptions to this rule, so it's just a case of learning those. So let's practice. How would you pronounce or read these words? The first one? That's right, this is the country Germany with a J sound because the G is followed by E, so it's Germany. Okay, the next one? Yes, glass. So this is a hard G because we've got U after glass. So we've not got E, I, or Y after the G. Okay, this one. Good, good. So that's a hard G, G, because again, it's not followed by E, I, or Y. So it's the hard G, good. And the last one. Giant with a J sound. So here we have got an I after the G, so it's pronounced J, giant. Okay, so that's how we read these words, and knowing this pattern can help us when we're writing or spelling the words. So if you have a word that starts with a J sound, it can be really difficult to know if you're using G or J. So one of the best ways is to think about the sound that comes next. So for example, if your word is jacket, jacket, we've got an A sound after the J sound. So if we used a G, we'd use the hard G, jacket, because it's not E, I, or Y. So here we would use a J to make the J sound, jacket. Another example is the word jog. So J, O, G. The sound after the J is O. It's not E, I, or Y sound. It's not I. It's O. So here we would use a J because if we use G, we'd say gog. Another example is jungle. 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 It's not an I, Y sound. It's an So we'd use a J. Jungle. Otherwise, we'd pronounce it gungle, and that doesn't make sense. Again, there are exceptions to this pattern with words such as jet or jest, and that's because they're either modern words, Old English words, or Germanic words where they keep that j sound. So for those words, it really is just a case of learning them and recognizing that spelling. So let's practice. How would you spell these words? Okay, the first one, jump, jump. Are you going to use a J or a G? Jump. Good. So for jump, we've got the J sound followed by for a U, an sound. So we'll use a J. Otherwise, we'd say gump. The next one, gentle, gentle. Yeah, so here we've got an sound following the J sound. Gentle. So we'll use a G. Gentle. The next one, ginger, ginger. So here we've got ginger, a short vowel sound I, which is spelled with an I. So we'll use a G, ginger. And the last one, jar, jar. Good. So here we've got the R sound, which is not an E, I, or Y. So we'll spell it with a J. So please remember that are exceptions. This is not a steadfast rule, but I really hope this helps with your spelling and you can use this pattern. If you have any other questions, let me know in the comments and please follow along.